I want to introduce to you someone that all of you feel like you already know. Many of you do know him, and we've seen him on television. We saw him some years ago, first came across him during the Iran-Contra hearings and so forth, and I knew right away when I heard this man speak that I was going to like him. When he walked in my office a little while ago, the first time I'd ever met him personally, it was like I'd known him for 20 or 30 years. He is just a natural, friendly, wonderful person. Oliver North is a combat-decorated Marine, a #1 best-selling author, the founder of a small business, an inventor with 3 U.S. patents, a syndicated columnist, and the host of war stories on the Fox News channel. Yet he claims that his most important accomplishment is to be, in his words, the husband of 1, the father of 4, and the grandfather of 11. And I think that may be 11 and a half now. Colonel North was born in San Antonio, Texas, graduated from the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. He served 22 years as a United States Marine. His awards for service in combat include the Silver Star, the Bronze Star for Valor, and 2 Purple Hearts for wounds in combat. He was assigned to the National Security Council staff in the Reagan administration, and Lieutenant Colonel North was the United States government's counterterrorism coordinator from 1983 to 1986. He was involved in planning the rescue of 804 medical students on the island of Grenada, and many of you will remember that, and played a major role in the daring capture of the hijackers of the cruise ship Achille Lauro. After helping plan the United States raid on Muammar Gaddafi's terrorist bases in Libya, Colonel North was targeted for assassination by Abu Nidal, the infamous terrorist found dead in Baghdad in August 2002. President Reagan described Colonel North as an American hero, and all of us here today believe that he indeed was and is. Since 2001, he has been the host of War Stories, the award-winning military documentary on Fox News. He's also authored 11 books, all of them New York Times bestsellers. His latest book, American Heroes. I got up at 3 o'clock in the morning the other day just to read that book, and it is an incredible saga, a tale of heroism. You need to get that book, and you'll have the opportunity to purchase it if you haven't already. They'll be on sale in the light tower behind me as you can go down these foyers. You may want to go down this one to my right because the line will be going this way. There'll be a long line, and you can purchase those books, and Colonel North will sign the book for you. Wonderful Christmas present for your family or your friends. This book, American Heroes, is based on his extensive coverage of United States military units engaged in Afghanistan, Iraq, and the Philippines. He's also the founder of Freedom Alliance, a foundation that provides college scholarships for the sons and daughters of service members killed in action. And I think the greatest thing we can say about Colonel Oliver North is that he is a believer in the Lord Jesus Christ as his Lord and Savior. First family, would you join me in welcoming to our platform Colonel Oliver North? God bless you. We love you. Bless you.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Pastor. Thank you, Randy, for being here when I need you. It is an honor to be with you today on the eve of Veterans Day. I must also acknowledge that the option that Fox gave me was to be either here or Kandahar. So I'm really glad to be back in Oklahoma with so many friends and fellow believers. I want to just share a couple of thoughts with you here this morning about things that really are important, and do that in the context of what it is day in and day out. Pastor mentioned my most recent book, and I'm blessed that it's done so well. It's titled American Heroes, and then the subtitle is In the War Against Radical Islam. My colleagues at Fox News are often asking exactly what is it you do? And I tell them I keep company with heroes. And I can tell with young people especially that immediately conjures up some image of someone wearing a spandex suit and a cape. My heroes don't wear spandex suits and capes. My heroes wear flak jackets and combat boots and flight suits. And they are absolutely remarkable young Americans. I'm also challenged because very often a hero is perceived to be the person who catches the pass in the end zone, or someone who's gone out and won 7 or 8 Olympic medals, and they're described that way by my colleagues in the media as heroes. But that's not a hero. A hero is a person who puts themselves at risk for the benefit of others. That's the real definition of a hero. And that defines all those of you who stood up earlier when the anthems of each one of our services were being sung so beautifully by this choir. Those are people who put themselves at risk for the benefit of their countrymen. They gave up the comforts of home, the affections of loved ones, and they went to faraway places, often in difficult circumstances and many times in deeply dangerous conditions. And blessedly, most of them returned and moved right back into their societies. And today, that's happened over 1 million times for young Americans who've served in places like Afghanistan, Iraq, and the Philippines, where they're up against an enemy who has been taught how to die the right way. Now, here's the dramatic difference. What you saw take place during that baptism is evidence that we're taught not how to die the right way. For us, all the dying was done 2,000 years ago on a hill called Calvary. For us, it's all about living the right way. And that is the model that has been set, despite what you've heard in the so-called mainstream media. That is the model that has been set by young Americans in those faraway places. I know how they've been described by my colleagues. I've seen it. Very often I'll be overseas and we'll end up with a copy of Stars and Stripes, or sometimes even go back to a base where they've actually got this stuff called television. Most of the time I'm out in places where the only signal we've got is off a tiny little transceiver that we've mounted on top of a Humvee or folded out and set on top of the hood of a truck or a tank or a Bradley fighting vehicle. And Fox gives us this remarkable equipment so that we can get, 1, the signal out, and number 2, send our product, and number 3, get feedback from those back at home. Last night we were on Fox News Channel at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. your time. That's War Stories. We're required to do that by Mr. Murdoch. And it shows one of those times when I was broadcasting just a few weeks ago from Afghanistan, where I got to spend a good bit of the summer this year. Feedback is important. It's important in your life and in mine. In television, it's all about ratings. Feedback tells us how we're doing. I want to talk about your feedback in a moment. While I was out doing this last stint with the U.S. Marines in Afghanistan, I had said to Alan Colmes, who's the co-host of one of our shows, with a fellow by the name of Sean Hannity. And Colmes and I'd sent some tape back of a gunfight that had occurred. And then Colmes and I had had a discussion while I'm standing next to one of the young heroes who'd been engaged in that gunfight. And I'd said to Colmes, you don't get it, which apparently is something I say a lot to Colmes. So, Colmes, you don't get it. Ground combat is the worst experience a human being can endure. And he'd actually had a debate with me as if he knew something about it. And I'm standing right next to one of these guys who's just been in it. It was my camera that got it, but he's just endured that. And so I put him on, and as I put him on, up pops into our little transceiver an email that's coming from somebody watching the show. I brought it with me just to give you an idea of the kind of feedback we get before we talk about the kind of feedback you get. This is an email, came live while we're on the air. Colonel North, on Hannity and Colmes, you just said ground combat is the worst experience any human can have. This is not true. The worst experience any human can have is spending time with my mother-in-law. My best friend spent 2 years in Iraq, did a tour of duty in Afghanistan, lost his right hand in Fallujah, He has met my mother-in-law. I just called him. He agrees with me, says it's not even a close call. Jim in San Diego. Now, that's feedback. That tells you how you're doing. And all I'm trying to do is talk about people who have remarkable courage and perseverance and dedication and loyalty and integrity and Christian compassion. Because that's the young Americans that we're with out there on the battlefield. Combs obviously doesn't get it. Apparently, most of my colleagues in the mainstream media doesn't get it either. So I've brought with me a few frames of the hundreds of miles of footage I've shot now in 14 trips off to cover this war. I want to put them up on the screen so that you see who these youngsters are. First of all, average age, 20 and a half years of age. Makes him about 2 years older than his great-grandfather, who might have served in World War II, or a year older than the Marines like Randy Harrod, who served with me in Vietnam. They have an average of 13 and a half years of education. Every one of them is at minimum a high school graduate. And they've gone on and gotten another year and a half of education beyond, on average. And they operate and maintain the most sophisticated weapons and equipment ever designed by the hand and mind of man. They go to work wearing a 7-pound Kevlar helmet, and today a 45-pound flak vest with plates front and back on either side that is life-saving. I know, been there, done that. And they do it at 125 degrees or more, wearing another 50 pounds of gear on their back plus their weapon. They can take a life or save one with it because that's what they've been trained to do. They can use their body like a weapon or their weapon like it was part of their body. These are youngsters who, let me put it this way. How many of you ever raised a teenage boy? See, I can do this now because Betsy's not here. But I did this once with Betsy in the audience. She said, "You did not do that." I did that. The thing about trying to get a teenage boy to make his own bed, do his own meals, clean all his own dishes, go to the grocery store and get all he's going to need for the next several days, wash all his own clothes, clean the house, put on a flak jacket and helmet, go out and do 18 or 19 hours a day, come back and do the same thing day in and day out, totally self-sufficient, without a size 10 in the backside to make it happen. That's what they do today. The same kid who once would not share a candy bar with a little brother will now give away his last drop of water to a wounded comrade. They will literally split their ammo with a mate in a firefight and they give their only ration to a hungry Iraqi or Afghan kid. And what they have done by virtue of the way in which they do it, they have demonstrated extraordinary Christian compassion. Why do I have confidence that this war is being won? Because so many of the youngsters that I have covered have that kind of profession of faith. The one you just saw here just a few moments ago in baptism, the kind that you see up there. None of these pictures are staged, friends. None of these, hey, let's go all the guys behind the chaplain kind of stuff. When these guys gather in a prayer circle, they're not getting ready to go on a football field. They're going out into lethal combat, and they know that some of their comrades or they themselves may not come back alive. But what they do know, to a remarkable extent, an extraordinary number of them, is they know where they are going and they know why they are going there. Now, I'm not talking about a map and a compass here. I'm not talking about a GPS. Listen carefully. They know where they are going and they know why they are going there, and they set an example of Christian compassion every day for people who have never seen it before. Now, up on the screen, I saved this one for last because it means so much to me. Marines love their Navy corpsmen. Randy Harrod saved my life on one occasion, and a U.S. Navy corpsman saved my life on another occasion. What you see in the center of that screen up there is the United States Navy corpsman. I had first met him in 2001 when he was the junior corpsman in a rifle company that had just gone into Kandahar right after Operation Enduring Freedom began. I met him again in April of 2003, and he's now the senior corpsman for a Marine rifle company in the lead attack going to Baghdad. Baghdad is the smoke you see in the background. The Marine Rifle Company is all the way in the front of the entire 1st Marine Division on the way to Baghdad. We're about 12 miles from the city. They get ambushed by a Republican Guards regiment, that one rifle company. They spin their vehicles around and call for the armor to come charging up the middle. And in the middle of this gunfight, this U.S. Navy corpsman that you see in the center of the screen goes out into the gunfight, rescues 2 wounded Marines, puts battle dressing down, throws them over his shoulder, and brings them back to a helicopter that lands in the middle of the road. I'm on the helicopter when you see this frame right here. I'm on the ramp of the helicopter holding my camera as he brings the 3rd wounded fighter up. Off to the right-hand side, as you look at the screen, a Reuters news crew comes running up, sets up their tripod, and tapes him as he goes into the helicopter, where that wounded fighter, if you look very carefully, is not a wounded Marine. He's got U.S. military battle dressings on his grievous wounds. That is a wounded Republican Guards fighter. This guy's just rushed into the battlefield to save his life, bandaged him up, put him on his back, carried him 100 yards to the helicopter, all by himself. And the Reuters news crew, as the corpsman staggers back off the helicopter, back into the gunfight to see if anybody else needs his help, the Reuters news crew shouts out to him, "Hey, mate, what did you do that for? Didn't you notice?" In other words, you stupid American, "didn't you notice that was an Iraqi?" Pastor, since we're in church, I can only put it this way. The corpsman gives what we would call a gesture. Hey, whoa. You're not supposed to get that part. He gives a gesture off to the Reuters news crew and says, "Didn't you notice he was wounded?" That's what we do. We're Americans. Here's why I'm confident of the outcome of this long, long war. It's not just because Americans talk and talk the talk. It's because young Americans in flak jackets and helmets and flight suits walk the walk. You see, what young Americans have become in a part of the world that doesn't still in large part understand it is that young Americans wearing those flak jackets and helmets are now the protectors of Muslim women. I don't know that much about biology. I've got a doctor son-in-law who tries to explain it, and a nurse daughter. But I do know this much. The good Lord did not put in the DNA or the genes or the gender of a woman the desire to have their child grow up to become a suicide terrorist. What does a mother want? A mother wants their child to have an opportunity to live the right way, not die the right way. And so young Americans have now become the protectors of Muslim women who now get to put their finger in a pot of purple ink and vote for people who are going to give their children schools and health care and an opportunity not to be a suicide terrorist, but to be a doctor or a lawyer, an accountant, have a job. In other words, a better future. And so young Americans, by virtue of walking that walk of Christian compassion every day in acts like you saw on the screen, not one of those photographs in that book or on the screen were staged. It's all the real thing. And the real thing that I see dominant in all of what I've experienced now, in more months in this war than the war I went to with Randy Herod, is an extraordinary number of remarkably courageous Christians fighting for what they believe in, walking the walk. A few moments, no, wait, we're not done yet. A few moments ago, I mentioned feedback. Let me challenge you here this morning. There are many here in church this morning who undoubtedly understand the importance of what you saw take place in baptism right here. The extraordinary thing for me is to see how many young Americans wearing the uniform of the armed forces of the United States, soldiers, sailors, airmen, guardsmen, and Marines, how many of them understand it. And they don't just talk about it, they carry it out. The number of youngsters who will be seen with one of these books exceeds anything in my experience. And I've spent my entire life, I grew up in the Army. My dad was a soldier. I went off to the Marines at age 17. I've been in or around it all my life. I have never seen so many courageous, committed young Christians as I see today. They are seen routinely reading from this book. They, by evidence of the way they live, and by the way, acknowledge they can take vulgarity to the level of a new art form, okay? But they will then sit down with this book, and this, by the way, is not one of my novels. This book is totally true, every word in it. And they know that. They know from their own experience, and those that mentored them, and those who they follow, and those who they lead, that this word is true. And they count on it, knowing as they are to be in terrible harm's way every single day. Now, why is that important? Their feedback is evidence of faith in their lives. Whether they're at Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio suffering from burns, whether they're at Walter Reed being fitted for a prosthetic limb, whether they mourn the loss of one of their comrades who they expect to see again because they know where they're going and they know why they're going there. Now, for those of you who don't understand that, let me give you a little bit of feedback. And I'll base it on my own experience. Knowing where you're going and knowing why you're going there is the direct consequence of knowing the word in this book. Let me give you a couple of examples. We're out on the battlefield with a young, average age 21, 22 years old. I think the lieutenant was 23. Shortly after I had left him, he walked past an improvised explosive device and lost both of his legs in what's called a traumatic amputation. He had been the captain of the U.S. Naval Academy rugby team. I didn't get to see him as he was medevaced out because I was with another rifle platoon near the Haditha Dam in Iraq. When I heard about it and the fact that the corpsman couldn't even find enough flesh to be able to apply a tourniquet, I expected that I'd have to wait a few years before I saw him again in a far better place, because I knew he was a believer. When I got back to the States, his parents contacted me and said, "Would you come and see him in the hospital?" I said, "That's astounding." He was by then at Bethesda Naval Hospital. He'd been flown from the battlefield to Al-Assad Air Base, from there to Balad, and then to Landstuhl, Germany. And on the way, they'd given him 67 units of blood, which my doctor son-in-law tells me is more blood than the human body's got in it, by 3- or 4-fold. He was still not expected to live. When I got to the hospital to see him, his mom was there, his sister had come up, his dad's a doctor in South Carolina. I walked into his hospital room, and there's a bed with half a body in it because it's gone from here down. He's got pipes and hoses and wires, tubes coming in and out of the bed hooked up to him, monitors of all kinds behind him. And he walked in the door, and his first words to me when he opened his eyes were, "Hey, Colonel, ain't God good?" I said, "Brother, you have got faith." He said, "No, I heard you talk. I know what you mean by knowing where you're going and why you're going there. I thought I was on my way when they took me off the battlefield." I said, "Andrew, are you certain?" And he said, "Sure, because remember Romans 10:9. This is feedback, friends. Romans 10:9. If you confess with your lips that Jesus is Lord, and you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Saved. He knows that. He's, by the way, now getting ready to start law school at the University of Virginia and marry one of his doctors. I'm actually going to be with him next week for a brief church service to thank the Lord for saving him as an example of what should be in all of our lives. I don't want to show of hands on this, but I know for a fact, because I know it's true in my life, every single one of us here knows someone who does not know where they are going or why they are going there. Listen carefully. My challenge to you here is that you have an obligation, whether it's a parent or a child or a sibling or a friend or a neighbor or a coworker, someone you know does not know Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. You have a mission, and your mission is very straightforward. You have to not just talk the talk, you have got to walk the walk, just like these young courageous centurions out there, which gets me to centurions. Centurion is a soldier. Soldiers are the kinds of people who are often unpopular. We've certainly seen evidence of that in our media. I think in large part it's because most of the members of the media are in awe of those who wear our nation's uniform. They've never seen demonstrated courage like this before. They've never seen perseverance and dedication and integrity like they see, and it intimidates so many of them. I really do believe that's why so many in the media cast so many aspersions on those in uniform. One of the great things about being in uniform is leadership and mentoring. And my challenge to you is, those of you who know what I'm talking about when I say knowing where you're going and why you're going there, your challenge is to act and speak in a way that that person you may know and love who doesn't know the Lord finds his own way or her own way to that same conclusion. You can't do it for them. You can't walk them over the edge of the precipice. They have to take that step themselves, but they will often do it because someone who is important to them led them to that. That's your mission. That's your challenge. That's your task going forward from today on this Veterans Day. If you're a veteran in the Lord's Army, you've got to do that. And I thank God that that happened to me. At the age of 35, I was assigned as a Marine Operations Officer to a battalion commander by the name of John Grinnells. He just retired a short while ago as the president of the Citadel, the only Marine to ever command the Citadel. John Grinnells was my battalion commander in the late 1970s. In 1978, we were getting ready to deploy to the Mediterranean, and I had chosen to overlook the fact that this man was known for two things. One, as being one of the brightest people on the planet from West Point. I graduated from Annapolis, and I was not the brightest person on the earth. Number two, I knew he was going to be a general officer, and I was willing to overlook the fact that he was also known as one of these, well, you've heard of them, born-again Christians. I used to catch him reading from this book on government time. Oh, yeah. But because he was going to be a general and he was so darn smart, I decided I would overlook all that. And John Grinnells, who, among other things, slapped me in the chest one day with a copy of this book and said, "Major, you had better come to know your Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Read this." I was a good Marine. I can follow orders. I started at the beginning. Almost got lost in Leviticus. Then I got to Matthew's Gospel in the 8th chapter, verses 5 through 13. And there is a Roman army infantry officer. I'm an infantry officer. You see, when I was commanding Randy Harrod's platoon, I was good. And I knew I was good. And I thought all the good things that I had done were because I had worked so hard at it, and I was tougher and smarter, braver and all that stuff. And they gave me a chest full of medals to show for it. And I was pretty sure I was God's gift to the Marine Corps. Just think how tough it was to live with me for my lovely wife and Where did you get that picture of her, by the way? That's a drop-dead gorgeous woman that was up there. I saw that. That's her. By 1978, I'd been through a lot of experiences and truly did believe by then that I was the answer to everything that the Marine Corps needed. And John Grinnells had thumped me in the chest with that book and told me to read it. And I'm on the USS Austin and then headed into the Mediterranean Sea. And I suddenly dawned on me why John Grinnells acted the way he did. Here's a Roman army infantry officer in Matthew's gospel who walks up to Jesus, who is teaching in Capernaum. I've now been to Capernaum since then. Hadn't been there, but I've been there several times since. Right on the Sea of Galilee. It's where Pete had his fishing operation. Oh. Some of you are wondering which, this is the MIV translation, the Marine Infantry version. Pete's got his fishing operation there. These 12 guys have moved in with Pete's mom. She's doing all the pizza. I mean, it's every day, and they go out and they teach, and they've come from all over Galilee. And Jesus is now sitting on the front steps of the synagogue. Anybody been to Capernaum? It's magnificent. They've found where the synagogue is. They found the main street. They're pretty sure what that underwater pier is, that was Pete's pier, where he had his fishing fleet. And Jesus is sitting on the front steps, and he's talking about his Father. Not inside the synagogue, outside. And a Roman army infantry officer, this centurion, who's the commander of the occupying army, walks up to Jesus in the crowd. And he says, "Excuse me, hello back here. I'm the martial law authority. I've got a sick servant at home. Would you heal him?" And Jesus probably stands up at that point. I've been there and I've looked at this, and he would have stood up and looked, and of course the crowd would have grumbled because this is a guy who's the occupier. He's the martial law. Jesus says to him, "Sure, let's go." And the Roman army officer says, "Oh, no, no, Lord. I'm a man of authority. I can tell someone to come, and they come. I can tell another to go, and they go. I know what authority is. You don't need to enter my house. I'm not worthy that you should come into my house. But I do have a sick servant at home. Please heal him." Jesus, it doesn't say this in Matthew or Luke, but I can just picture Jesus going, "This guy gets it. Hey, guys, he gets it." Turns to the 11 who've worn out their sandals all over Galilee and says to the Roman army officer, "Go home. It's done as you ask." And we know in that instant, boom, the servant's healed. Then Jesus does something absolutely astounding. Think about this. Here's the disciples who've walked all over Galilee, literally worn out their sandals with him. And he turns to them and he says about the Roman army infantry officer, "Greater faith than this in all Israel I have not seen." Why does he say that? Here's why. The law of the land in Israel and in all of what is the occupied Roman Empire is this. Officers serve at the pleasure of the Senate in Rome. A Roman citizen is subject to Roman law, not the local law. Anyone who consorts with a seditionist or a traitor is subject to the same sanction by the Senate. I know something about sanctions from senates. Okay. Anyone who consorts with a seditionist is subject to the same punishment as the traitor. The Roman army infantry officer, because he's on the inside, knows that Jesus Christ is being watched by the secret police of the day. Records are being kept. Who talks to him? Who are these people? And we know what happens to all of his disciples. They all died some terrible fate. Those who consorted with Jesus are going to die the wrong way because they have consorted with a seditionist. What's the crime for which he is tried, sentenced, and executed? Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. There's only one king, Caesar. And this Roman army officer knows that he is putting his own life at risk to do what? To save a servant, probably in some translations a slave. In other words, someone who doesn't even matter to the rest of society. Now, how does this relate to all of what I've been talking about here this morning? 1, feedback. Number 2, your mission. Here it is. There is a person in your life who does not know Jesus Christ as you do. Or if you're here today, listen carefully. There is only one way to salvation, Jesus Christ. His sacrifice on Calvary, His resurrection from the dead. That's what Romans 10:9 is all about. But it doesn't say, oh, if I just sit here quietly, He'll know. It says if you confess with your lips, in other words, you profess your faith, and you believe in your heart. That's what it says. So your charge, your challenge here is to do just that. There's 2 things you got to do. Number 1, you have to give evidence of it in your own life. You cannot be a phony. The youngsters I hang around with are not phonies. They inspire me with their courage, their dedication, their Christian compassion. They believe it. They live it. They don't just talk about it. You've got to do that too. The second thing you got to do is prayer. You have got to pray for those who don't know Him. Now, friends, I will tell you this. If you don't listen to anything else I say here this morning, remember this. I stand before you as living proof of the power of prayer. I am alive today because of the power of prayer. Every time I return from Iraq, my son-in-law, who's a pastor of a church, comes and picks me up at the airport, all my gear. And the first words out of his mouth every time, 14 trips now, is, good to see you home, Colonel. I make my sons-in-law call me Colonel. He was an Army Ranger. Only Army Ranger I'd let marry my daughter. We've been praying for you. And I tell him, Tom, thank you, because I'm proof that they're answered. I came to that conclusion as a consequence of John Grinnell's handing me a copy of this book, reading it, seeing the evidence of Christ in his life, and getting down on my knees, knowing suddenly that I am a frail, flawed mortal. I have no right to walk into the gates of heaven, even though they're guarded by U.S. Marines. I have no right to walk in there except through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. He is my only advocate. I get down on my knees every night and pray to God, I'm so sorry for not having lived up to what I'm supposed to do. I get up every morning trying hard to do better. There's no way as a human being I'll ever be able to be the model of Christ to my children, my wife, my friends, my neighbors that I'd like to be, because I'm human. I finally figured that out. But I do know that prayers are answered. And so I ask you to pray mightily for those that you know who don't know Him. To live as an example of what Christ is in your life. And I guess I'd close with this. That very first morning, Pastor mentioned the fact that I'd put it this way. I was invited to chat with some members of Congress in 1987. Well, actually, I was subpoenaed. That very first morning, the federal agents who protected my family and me picked us up in an armored vehicle, brought Brendan Sullivan, the lawyer, and me to an underground garage in that Capitol Hill office building, brought us up by a back elevator. They cleared the hallways in the Capitol. And the hallways are almost as wide as one of the ships I used to go to sea on. And we're walking down this hallway, and they put us in this cleared hallway off in a holding room and said, wait here until we make sure that the metal detectors are working, because nobody wants something to happen on their watch. And Brendan and I went and got down on our knees, and I said, Dear God, if there's ever going to be an earthquake in Washington, let it be this morning. No. Actually, all I had time to say was, Dear Lord, please help me. Then knock on the door. The federal agents who were part of my family protective security detail had surrounded themselves with a dozen or so armed Capitol Hill police officers in uniform. So you've got the civilian-clothed guys with Uzis in their gym bags, and in the center of all of this, and then Brendan Sullivan and me, and this double cordon of armed men and women go across this empty hallway to the entrance to the hearing room. And as we get there, there's this kind of cluster goggle because you can't get them through the great big double oak doors. And out of nowhere, a little lady with white hair reaches through the double cordon of armed men and puts this card in my hand. Brendan grabs it. Some folks have shown me the videotape. As we're walking through the doors, Brendan is grabbing this card out of my hand and putting it in his pocket like this. As we walk in, he's telling me, don't be reading things other people give you. Now, it does make you wonder how good the security is up on Capitol Hill, because she was only about... We sat down at that cloth-covered table, and Sullivan takes the card out of his pocket, and he props it on the microphone stand on the table. And in all the pictures you see from those hearings, if you see the table that we're sitting at, there's this card, and all you can see is the backside of this card. People have said to me 1,000 times, you look so calm. You didn't look rattled at all. Here's people throwing hand grenades at you up in the raised dais where the Roman emperor, or the members of Congress were. But you just were unruffled. Well, by 1987, I knew where I was going, and I knew why I was going there, and therefore, there's nothing to worry about. When we got blown up over in Afghanistan on August 3rd this past summer, it was not just that I'm unflappable. It's not that I don't care. I duck when people shoot at me. But there's not a lot if it's my time, I'm going to go. But I know where I'm going. And so you don't get all agitated about it. You duck when people shoot at you, but you get out of the way of the bus that's coming at you. But if it gets you, you don't have to worry about it. I'll get to see Betsy again. And she's not going to tell me to dry the dishes. It was a long, hot summer. About the third or fourth day of the hearings, one of the reporters closed in around Brendan before we could get out of the room, because they always took us out first with the armed security detail. They'd bring us to the holding room, and then they'd break for lunch, and when we'd come back and start again, day after day for 9 days. About the third or fourth day, one of the reporters gets up to Sullivan and says, Sullivan, quick, before they come and take me away, what's on the card? And Sullivan goes like this. This card. He says, yeah, what's on the card? Sullivan looks at it without showing him the other side. Says, the answers. Okay, here's the answers. Here's the answers. You will know where you are going. You will know why you are going there. You can lead as an example to that person who may actually be sitting right next to you right here, right now, with the most important decision of his or her life. You can help them get there. If you confess with your lips that Jesus is Lord, you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, and you can live that life for them. You can encourage them. You can exhort them. You can show them the power of Christ in your life. That is my mission for my 11 grandchildren. That is my mission for my children's mates. That is my mission in life for those who I have the great blessing to associate with as heroes today. If I can do that, no matter how many hours of documentary film we make, then I will have fulfilled my mission. Because my job is to show Jesus in my life as a frail, flawed sinner who is saved. Who is saved. You can do that as well. Oh, the card. Yeah. You're wondering what's on the card. Sullivan said the answers. How do you stay calm, cool, and collected in the midst of all the travail of life? And your life and my life and all of our lives are full of travail. There's always going to be things that don't turn out the way we'd like. Some of it happens in politics. Some of it happens to the economy. Some of it happens in business. Some of it happens in sickness and injury. Some of it just goes wrong, right? Here's how you get through. Sullivan said it was the answers. Here's what's really on the card that sat right there in front of me through those whole hearings. He gave it to me afterwards and said, you probably want to hang on to this. Here's what's on the card. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not feel faint. Isaiah 40:31. Those are the answers. God bless you, and thank you for having me here.